If you want to talk about the best piece of work of the 9 champion, it is definitely the Sudden sword, which is made by twisting 8 pieces of Damascus steel embryo. After all, on the day this sword was released, it overpowered the other 2 judges in the judging battle and enabled Power Ben to win the first place in the summit match. Therefore, today, the home court of Power Ben specially took out this top artifact to serve as the ultimate challenge for the contestants. Of course, before the official challenge, several contestants had to hammer Ben's family heirloom hook and sickle to show their strength, considering that this is an important sacred weapon granted to Ben by Ben himself, and also specially prepared 2 pieces of pure nickel for each of the contestants, and asked them to combine it with 1095 soft steel and hammer it into 5 pieces to forge the hook and sickle, and the 5 pieces are the center of the hard steel, then nickel wrapped, and then the soft steel finishing forging techniques. At the same time, the hammered blade must have a curved hook at the tip, and the length of the blade must be limited to 20 to 22 centimeters. Ben was trying to get a couple of contestants to go home in the first round, so after Shin got the materials, it was a wave of deep grinding. After all, it doesn't matter if it's 5 or 3 pieces. You can't go wrong if you remove the impurities before forging. Beryl even pulled out the acetone solution first, cleaned the nickel on the steel oil stains, and then the grinder to do a second grinding before completing the stack welding. This double cleaning is to prevent the steel from cracking. Jace thought that just grinding and cleaning would be enough to solve the fusion problem. Action, on the other hand, plans to cut all the steel in half before cleaning it. Mainly, in his opinion, the crew had a bit too much material. Good lord, what do you do if you don't have enough material for the hammered halves? Please. Enshin, the first wave to enter the furnace, has already started forging and joining 5 steel embryos. The speed is quite fast, but when it comes to the top, the steel embryo is directly cracked. The shape is a bit sharp. Luckily, he also knows how to sprinkle flux lightly, so after heating it up, one-shot finish fusing directly. Dace, on the other hand, directly performed a hand of girlfriend-style gentle stamping method, easily completed the initial forging of 5 steel embryo. The next step was to check for errors, and then the blade could be forged. Beryl also successfully completed the fusion of 5 pieces. After a wave of thrilling forging presses, he then decides to extend the blade directly from the press. Only Action, who had less material, was distraught when he saw the short blade. After all, he had less material, not to mention the stamping force. Luckily, the forged joint fused quite well, and Action was able to get on the hammer to shape the blade. Considering Power Ben's ancestral hooks and sides, the most difficult part of the blade is the curved hook at the tip. Beryl decided to use a power hammer to extend the front end and then use a press to shape it directly. The result is a little rough, but with a little fine-tuning, it should be close to the prototype. In the last hour and a half, after Action had extended the steel, it felt a little too long, so he thought about it and made another cut. I don't think Action has ever hammered 5 pieces of steel this rich before. How else could he have made all the cuts and all the lengths? The knife was hammered pretty well though, and when Shin hammered the blade, he realized it was slightly longer than the sample blade, so he had the bright idea of designing a fingertip notch directly out of it. This was a great way to achieve the standard blade length and add character to the blade, so it was a 2-for-1 deal. Jace, on the other hand, hammered out the front end elimination, while forging the curved hook at the tip of the blade. Not a bad problem, but still within the reach of Jace's solder injection. A wave of calcination was followed by a straight 3-hammer solution, but time was running out and he would have to pick up the pace. After all, Action had already heated up the blade embryo and started quenching it, with pretty good results. Looks like he's got no problem cutting steel and forging knives. Shin is the second to finish quenching his blade, which is also very straight. Beryl is right behind him with a straight blade that is ready for sharpening. Jace was the last to finish his hardening, and then he acid dipped the blade to check the hardened steel edge against the nickel pattern. Time was called for the first round of challenges to be completed, and the 4 masters were treated to the first round of audits with 5 forged Hercules Ben Ancestral Edition hook swords. First up was Jace's hook side with a clean blade and a very visible nickel pattern on the blade, which I can't say is great except for the slightly smaller hook. Next up was Beryl's hook sickle. The side of the blade was also very neatly finished, and it would have been nice if the hook was a little more curved. Action's 5 hooked sides were all very well wrought and forged, except for a crack in the back of the blade, which was a bit hard to take. Last but not least, Shin's 5 hooked knives are very well finished, especially the front hook edge pattern is very distinctive. At the end of the critique, after the judges made eye contact, the decision was made to eliminate Action. After all, he was the only one with a noticeable crack on the back of his knife, which was not yet good enough to be repaired. 3 contestants remain to advance to the second round. They will assemble the hilt and a circular handguard according to the sample knife from Power Ben. Once completed, they are handed over to the judges for high-intensity testing. The 2-hour countdown begins. Arrow picks out a piece of wood and prepares to build the handle first. For the rain guard, he cut a piece of copper pipe. Jace also got a piece of wood and copper pipe for the fittings, and used a grinder to grind the ring guard right out of the box. This allowed him to assemble the hilt directly. In the last hour, Shin drilled a hole through both sides of the shank and then burned through it. After Jace drilled the shank, he also went ahead and thinned a wave of the root of the knife. This allowed him to finish the assembly in one go. Beryl also opted for the burn-through method of assembling the handle. Nice guys, a couple of them are really artistic. Time was up and the second round of challenges was over. First up is the strength test of Vader Ben stake hacking. Jace's handsome hook sickle comes first. The blade is no problem at all, and Ben is very happy with it. Next up is Beryl's awesome hook sai. There is no problem with the blade, but the blade is slightly bent. And finally, Shin's handsome hook sai. Shin's knife is still in perfect condition, with almost no test marks on it. The second round was Seven's cane cutting sharpness test. Jace's knife cuts cleanly. Beryl's knife cuts, too. Shin's knife was equally strong. At the end of the 2 rounds, after the judges deliberated, the decision was made to eliminate Beryl. After all, his knife was the only one that got bent in the strong test. In the end, Shin and Jace advanced to the third final round. The two would go home to hammer out the Sun Who sword they used to compete for the episode's title. The Sun Who sword originated in 7th century England and is characterized by its ability to easily take the head of an enemy with a straight one-handed grip. The sample sword in this episode is from the Popeye Ben judges, who spent nearly 200 hours in the finals, piecing together 8 twisted damas to forge that sacred weapon. Its blade pattern can be said to crush the field. Of course, it was natural that the 2 contestants could not be so complicated. After all, they only had 4 days to forge the weapon. All they had to do was keep the blade length within 68 to 73 centimeters and add an oval guard with a rounded head. After 4 days, the sword was brought back for the ultimate test, and the winner would take the title for the session. So Jace went home and straight away opened the whole Dama steel embryo. It's a forging technique he doesn't use often, but after seeing Ben's sample sword, he decides to go crazy. After a day of hammering, he found a small crack in the steel, but after polishing, he realized that it was not a big problem. And Shin, in addition to the whole piece of high-level large horse steel, but also after it is stretched, ready to clip 2 pieces of pure nickel into it to increase the characteristics. This is a good guy who wants to make a whole stack of 5 pieces of Damascus. The forging of Jace's sword embryo also came to the final stage. While he was heating, he also organized a wave of sword hilt accessories. Who would have thought that because he burned it for too long, the sword embryo was directly burnt by him? Good lord, it wasn't rare for a player to burn a big horse. Now that time was running out. He could only pick a piece of finished steel to continue making. Shin has already hammered out 5 swords and started hardening them. The result is very good. Time came to the last day. Jace's second sword finally came to the grinding stage. All that was left to do was to assemble the hilt fittings and do the final finishing work. Don't say that the hilt was quite handsome. Aisha sighed. He made the hilt fittings in a hurry and also finished assembling the rounded head of the guard. The nickel pattern is also very bright. 4 days later, the 2 of them returned to the field with their swords. Shin's sword was forged with 5 damas in for 80 layers of dama-clad nickel, which is quite a fine pattern, and the hilt fittings were brass walnut. Jace's sword is forged from 1060 steel with brass and knotty wood hilt fittings. The 2 handsome swords will go through 3 rounds of testing. First up is a hands-on test of Seven's hawk slashing. Shin's handsome sword comes first. Shin's sword is slightly heavier, but cuts out enough. Next is Jace's sword. Jace's sword is a bit more powerful and Seven is very satisfied. The second round is the strength test of Ben's shield. When Ben tested his sword, it wasn't like this. Luckily, Shin's sword was hard enough to withstand it. Jace's handsome sword is also no problem at all. The last test is Seven's sharpness in cutting animal skin. Shin's sword is quite strong. Jace's sword is even smoother. At the end of the 3 rounds of tests, after the judges' discussion, the winner of this period is Jace. The main reason is that Shin's handsome sword is slightly bulky and not sharp enough. Congratulations to Jace contestant for taking the $50,000 bar.